Yes, this is Chris, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Just to let everybody know that I have just started recording this session. So be mindful that you are being recorded, and this is going to be shared across various networks, Frailty networks, sites, etc. Yes, so over to you, Ian, and I'll get the slides up.
Thanks, Chris. And everybody, please excuse me. This is the first time I've run a virtual conference. I've joined a couple before, and I've used Zoom quite a lot, but I've not used Teams before. So I'm new to this relatively. Welcome to everybody who's joined. I'm amazed at the number of people who've joined, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm also absolutely grateful for the number of STPs within the region who have put up slides for the sharing session, which is the main part of today's session. Chris, could you move on to the next slide, because I don't know how to do that. Thank you. So the way we're going to run this today, I hope that's okay with everybody, because as I say, I'm learning as I go along. I'm going to open and share some housekeeping rules in a few minutes. We're then going to be having a brief session with Steve Corton from the Better Care Fund Midlands region on virtual clinics for local systems, and then really the meat of the session, which was actually prompted by our conversations with STPs across the Midlands region over the last 3 weeks, is presentations from the STPs around predominantly about what's gone really well from people living with frailty from an urgent emergency care perspective, but also some of the knotty problems that they've had difficulty solving and what they would like some assistance with, because obviously this is about networking and sharing ideas across the region, and for those who are joining outside the region, wider. And I would love to see this actually being part of a national sharing and learning process in the future, but I'd love people's thoughts on that. When the STPs are presenting, I would ask that people hold their questions or put their questions via the comment box, if at all possible, which Chris is monitoring, because I'm running the show, so I can't see, I won't be looking at the comments because I'll lose my thread. And then at 12:25, we're going to have a Q&A session from delegates who might want to pose questions to STPs about how they've solved a problem. And I would ask that these would be posed via that conversation/comments box on Teams for us to be able to work through those. And if we can't get through all of them in the time allocated, we will link people up and get answers to those questions afterwards via email, if you can leave your email address on your question if it's not been answered. And then we're very lucky to have Dr. Bola Owolabi at 12:45 talking about the coronavirus pandemic and a paradigm shift in how we might start looking to the future and what the new normal will look like within the NHS, with particular reference obviously to older people, particularly with living with frailty, and how we might manage people as effectively by alternative pathways, if we can demonstrate that. And then I will close. So that's the agenda for the day. I hope that's fine for everybody. What I would like to do now, Chris, if you could go on to the next slide, is just for me to go through that introduction, just about Teams etiquette. We've already seen that on the first slide. Please make sure that you are on mute and with your camera off on Teams, unless you are a speaker for that session. Please, could we have all other phones on mute? I can still hear some background noise, so I'd appreciate if people could put on mute, because we've got to make sure that we can share the bandwidth with everybody. Thank you for that. And as I've already said, please use the conversation function on Teams to make comments and raise potential questions for the Q&A session. One thing that I would like people to be thinking about, not to be answering during this session, but is about recovery planning. And the key thing for me, I know the key driver from the World Health Organization has been test, test and test. To me, particularly around older people living with frailty across our systems, not just in the acute sector, but across our whole systems, presenting with urgent emergency care, problems is outcomes, outcomes and outcomes, and that's whether they are COVID-19 acute illness or non-COVID acute illness. And that's crucial for those patients living with frailty managed by alternative pathways, be that admission avoidance pathways or very early supported discharge pathways, because those outcomes will start informing what the new normal will look like. And I've been hearing on calls across the region about some quite amazing rapid integration and collaboration processes and some early impacts on outcomes, which I think is going to be very important for informing STPs and systems about the way forward. Secondly, outcomes for those patients who are not accessing appropriate care. We've heard a lot about patients, both frail and non-frail, who have not been attending A&E, who may well have ought to have attended A&E, but I think what's crucially important is how systems regionally and nationally we are starting to collate the evidence about those outcomes and whether there's going to be a second tsunami of those patients who are presenting very late. But we don't know that yet. We have a lot of anecdote. We have some early evidence, but I think it's absolutely crucial for all of us to be building evidence for both of those sets of outcomes. And finally, from the introduction to me, before I hand over to the people you really want to listen to, is what do you need from the regional team or from the wider systems to help you and support you over the next few months or couple of years? Because if we take the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, there were at least 3 or 4 waves over 2 years. And we've really got to be thinking how the new normal is going to look like after this, and how we can support each other across these next 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months to move things forward. Not specifically about older people with frailty, but we do need to have that very specific focus on people living with frailty to make sure their outcomes are not compromised inadvertently. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'll stop preaching. Chris, could you move on to the next slide, please? I'd love to now introduce Steve Corton, Better Care Manager for the West Midlands, talking about virtual clinics for local systems. Over to you, Stephen.
Hi there. Thanks, Ian. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Better Care Manager for the West Midlands. My email address is there on the slide. If you take a note of that, because if you want any more information on virtual clinics afterwards, please write to me and I'll get in touch with you. Okay, virtual clinics, what are they? If we move to the next slide, Chris. Okay, the virtual bit is meeting with system partners, probably using technology like today on MS Teams, Zoom or another platform. And the idea is to offer support on the requirements of the discharge guidance. So that support is the clinic bit. Now I say the discharge guidance, but Ian made reference to recovery planning. And although these were set up with the idea of guiding people and supporting them in implementing the discharge guidance, I think we've got a wider latitude now when we start to think about recovery. So we can have those conversations with you as well. We've got a core team based in the region with representation from ESIST, the Local Government Association, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, Better Care Team, people from NHSE and I, including Ageing Well Lead, and we've got a continuing healthcare specialist. And we would bring in additional national level input, which are tailored to the needs of the system partners that want that virtual clinic. So the virtual clinic is then an opportunity to ask questions, discuss challenges, any potential solutions that you can work collectively together on, or we can look at good practice, transferable good practice from outside that would help you with your system partners. It's aimed at all those involved in discharge at all levels and from all organisations. So we're taking quite a holistic view of this. It could be local government, health, housing, voluntary and community sector, social care providers. We're quite open as to who needs to be involved in that conversation. Now, these were piloted nationally by the National ESIST and Better Care team, and they had some success. Some of the resistance we felt they had were that because they were coming from national partners, it was seen as a regulatory forum or some sort of performance assessment. And we want to make it clear it is definitely not those things. This is a genuine offer to help find solutions to you at local level and to recognise the very difficult circumstances you're working in, that sometimes you need help or a different perspective from outside, and that's what it's there for. So it's not regulatory, it's not performance assessment, and also it's not a mediation for arguments to settle something that really should be settled at local level. We're coming in to try and support you as system-wide partners to get to grips with the challenge and find a way through that. We're piloting it in the West Midlands to begin with, and then we'll look at spreading it to the other parts of the Midlands, depending on how that goes and what sort of traction we get with colleagues. What we ask from systems is that you have a clear shared idea of the challenge you need help with. One of the difficulties we've had so far with the virtual clinics is there might be one or two partners within the system that want to have a call and identify a challenge, and then there's been a bit of effort needed to get the other partners on board. So what we ask is if you can come sharing that, that helps us a great deal to help you. And you come with a collective spirit so that you're mobilising around the challenge collectively, and some of the organisational perspectives are secondary to the joint collective responsibility and challenge that you're trying to sort out. Okay, could you move to the next slide, Chris? And just a couple of quotes of what people said so far. I'll leave you to read those. It has really helped people. And I think when we get that collective spirit and the opportunity to work with a system, and there is the sense that this is about support, it's not about assessment or regulation, then there are really productive conversations and good opportunities to resolve some of the really thorny problems that you're experiencing locally. I'm not saying that call or the virtual clinic will solve all the problems there and then, but the thing is you'll be talking to people that know people that can help out and unblock blockages, and we will own problems that we take away from that virtual clinic to help you there. So if you're interested in something in your system, please email me. It's stephen.coulton@nhs.net. Okay, that's it. Back to you, Ian.
Hi, can everybody hear me all right? I've got some problems with my Wi-Fi at the moment. Is that okay?
Yeah, I don't know if there were any questions about that immediately that you wanted me to field.
Hi,
Yeah, if there are any.
It's Chris here. We had one question on the comments from Rennie. How have you advertised the virtual clinic to care providers in the West Midlands?
Well, the handover from National happened on Tuesday, and this was a fortuitous part of the webinar where I was given a 5-minute slot, so we've got to look at doing that.
There was no more questions, Ian.
Well, could I just ask one? I may have missed it because my Wi-Fi was sort of flashing in and out there. A question really is about how we're involving the third sector and the private sector, particularly care homes and care home organisations in those conversations.
Yes.
I think that's particularly pertinent at the moment.
Well, we will make it clear when we advertise it to different systems that they're very welcome to be part of the discussions. I'm fortunate that I've been working on the NHS Mail rapid rollout to care homes. So we've got good links in the West Midlands with care home organisations. West Midlands Care Association particularly has been very helpful in the rollout of NHS Mail, and we'll make sure that there's an opportunity for them to be involved and raise those questions.
Fantastic, Stephen. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so Chris, if there are no other questions, I think now is moving on to the meat of it, is really turning over to our STP colleagues and sharing their experience, their thoughts, their challenges, and what they might need assistance with. And this isn't about, as we've already heard from Stephen, this isn't about regulation, this isn't about performance management, this is about sharing, supporting each other, and how somebody who might have solved a problem in one area might be able to share that solution with another part of the Midlands region and beyond. So Chris, moving on to the next slide, please. I'd like to introduce the first STP. Hopefully they're here.
No problems, Ian. I'll do that for you now. Just to say to Steve before he goes, there's another question and a comment on the comment section, and if he could look at that before he leaves the group, that would be great.
Yes, I will do. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, can I have the next slide? Or is my Wi-Fi frozen again? Excellent. Northampton, Renshu, over to you.
Hi, hello. I don't know if Julie Curtis is joining me on this. I know she's on the line, but I'll make a start. So in Northamptonshire, just going through your three questions, the key thing that we found that's gone really, really well is just the ability of the system to come together, and all the barriers that we've experienced previously, pre-COVID, has really just been able to overcome. We've been able to overcome that, and our hospital discharge is something that we find was a real success for us. We, as many of the other systems, struggled with over winter times, very high occupancy and over occupancy of the hospitals, and very quickly the system came together and reduced that to 60%. This has been into various areas of where we've needed to open some bedded capacity, but it's also with trying to get patients home in the first instance. And even if where we have used bedded capacity is putting the support around there to enable the flow through. So that really has been a success for us, and we've been able to maintain that up until now. We're sort of staying between 60-70% occupancy in the hospitals. We have also opened to support our care homes when some of the testing wasn't we didn't get the test results back for swabbing as quickly as we wanted to or would have liked to. We supported care homes who weren't able to isolate their patients in opening some hot sites. And again, this was supported by all our community providers, primary care, and we worked really closely with the care homes and the quality teams in the CCG and the council. The fourth point on there is our digital consultations within primary care, which the majority of our GPs are now doing virtual and digital consultations. There's some glitches still with some of the Wi-Fi and some of the laptops and systems, but the majority of them have really embraced this and very, very quickly started doing some of these digital consultations for patients. If I go into what are our three knotty problems, we, as a Northamptonshire system, was a little bit behind in some of our frailty work when we joined the Frailty Collaborative in August. So we've had to really quickly work to improve some of our systems, and COVID has affected that because we haven't had the time to embed some of our things like frailty, front door, same-day emergency care. And we also started working on some community multidisciplinary teams around PCN footprints. So we made very good progress. But initially when COVID started, the staffing was a real concern, and being able to keep those teams together when the pressure arose. So those were really, it was difficult to identify quickly where the highest need was. And initially, the perception was that obviously that needed to be to get the hospitals to have the capacity they need and change some of the areas into what they needed to be. Since then, we've moved a little bit into recovery, and we are rapidly putting our focus back into these into these areas. So our Frailty SDEC team, the systems come together, and we're filling the gaps where they're staffing with our community providers, with primary care, with our pharmacies in the community, to try and solve that problem where staff has had to self-isolate, or where staff has had to or have been off sick, or some of our geriatricians and our frailty doctors have been pulled into the COVID rota. So we're looking at solutions and how we can support that. Number two is around the ability to further develop our integrated community teams around the PCN footprints. So we've made some inroads pre-COVID around certain areas of Northamptonshire. So we had a really good model in the north. We were developing something in the south, but it hadn't really embedded very well, and we haven't been able to move that and scale and pace, which is something we're picking up right now as well. So we're looking at how can we have a Northamptonshire model, but with local variation, and really quickly scale that up during COVID to make sure that all our vulnerable patients in the community are supported with the right teams. And then the third one is the care home approach as well. So we're looking at how these virtual teams can support with primary care leadership our care homes. And the tricky bit has been when some of the care homes are really old buildings, and when we wanted to do virtual digital stuff, the capabilities around Wi-Fi and the other digital needs that they have has been tricky to overcome sometimes at pace. We also need to understand where we've needed some acute trust input, geriatric input to prevent admissions into hospital. So we're working through some of the challenges around how do we link in primary care with acute care and any of the other support that we're needing. And then I suppose lastly is, what do we need help with in the future? And I think it's just, although we've made real good inroads on some of our digital solutions there, we do find that that's our biggest challenge still, in terms of getting the right solutions for the right places. And again, where I said previously, where we don't have the capabilities in some of the areas or some of the teams, it's just how do we do that quickly and make it fit for purpose for all of our areas. And that's it. Thank you.
Hi, Ian. There's one question for Renshu from Rachel Marsh, and she's wondering, how did you isolate on your hot sites? Was this a community ward or other care homes with individual rooms?
It was one of our community hospital areas that we've converted into a hot site. So it was previously staffed as a palliative care unit, and we've just changed the purpose of it and made it a hot site for COVID.
Thank you, Ian.
Excellent, Renshu. Thank you so much. Renshu, are you around for the whole of the rest of the session? Because there will be discussions in the last 30 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic, Renshu. That was really helpful. Okay, Chris, can we move on to the next team, please? Renshu, if you could switch off your microphone. That's perfect. Thank you. And Derbyshire, Jonathan.
Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's all right.
Hi, Jonathan.
I'll give the results from the Derbyshire jury. And I won't go camera-wise, just to avoid any risk of internet connection. And we had a chance to get together to discuss what we were going to share with everybody yesterday. So I hope my colleagues are right behind me on this. So in terms of the positive things, we've started to talk about some of the ways we worked during this period of time. And there's a real feel about an improved level of responsiveness, that we've been able to make some changes very rapidly. And some of that has been because we've almost like moved away from big bureaucratic meetings, bit governance light, but making frequent, regular, well-attended video conferences, making use of this sort of technology around single unifying purposes that have led to decisions being made very quickly in a time period it might have taken us to get people together previously. And I think there's also a permissive environment to enable decisions to be made because it's the right thing to do. So that's one area. I think in terms of the clinical leadership has really driven forward some of this. I think the ability across organisations have conversations across clinical leaders has made to focused on rapid problem solving, and again that focused on decision making and the ability to produce documentation and support to the environment going forward. I think some of the examples, or we would focus on the sort of red hubs in primary care. I think again the rapid adoption of remote consultations and technologies across multiple environments, not just primary care consultations, and in different environments, and that goes from preventative intervention. So we've had falling, our falling service doing video Zoom chair-based exercise, and we've also got support going in from palliative care colleagues into care homes. So we've got that whole range of remote input going on, and that's all rapidly deployed. We've also had some rapid guidance developed around end of life and care home support, again across multiple organisations, all pulling together and enabling that support and documentation. And I think that ability to put stuff out there quickly and get the feelers for whether that needs to be adapted in an agile way going forward is enable things to happen. And I think one of the things we've noticed, and this is the whole agenda around frailty and especially care homes has really been accentuated and raised during this time, because we know they're vulnerable people that a non-traditional, non-clinical support arrangements need to be put in place rapidly. And I think that really helps us as a launch pad with some of this work going forward. In terms of knotty problems, I think there's a concern there might be people who are getting frailer without being noticed because of all the focus on urgent capacity, and these maybe people who weren't on the frailty agenda before, or maybe mild, whose journey has progressed during lockdown, and we're not quite sure what the cohesive response of the system is to them. In terms of a single electronic patient record, I think it's highlighted the lack of progress on that sometimes. And I think also in terms of our progression towards a single team across health and social care and beyond, some of the organisational barriers haven't been removed. Whilst there's some great working across, I think we need to focus on those organisational boundaries being removed. In terms of what help we could do with, I think reflecting inwards is how do we adopt that real engaged clinical leadership and getting things done approach. So how can we make things that dynamic, agile progression of improvement rather than a stoic adherence to project management? I think again, how do we evaluate the changes that are happening? Are they having the positive impact on patient outcomes that we'd want? And then again, moving to those outcomes-based commissioning. And we've also talked about what does a dynamic real-time business intelligence environment look like when we're looking at the change in demand and capacity within community services and general practice in particular. So I think that's probably some of the environment. I don't know if some questions have come up.
Jonathan, hi, it's Ian here. That's a fantastic summary, and particularly like the emphasis on continuous improvement as opposed to the stifling of regulation and constant assurance frameworks. I think that's really important moving forward. The agility of being able to do change has been really empowered by this pandemic and has been released, particularly around clinical leadership. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, Chris, any burning questions straight to Jonathan?
So there's no questions at this moment in time, but there is compliments, Jonathan. So well done.
Jonathan, hi. Are you going to be around for the full session? Because there will be obviously there's the Q&A session, and there may well be things where people will want to connect and whatever. This is more about not just sharing, but also about connecting. But as I say, I really appreciate that input. Is really great. Okay. Yeah. So Jonathan, thank you so much. Moving on, Andrew Hindle, Dudley, over to you.
Thank you. I will hopefully be able to pass on to a couple of colleagues in Dudley, Dr. Doman, Dr. Duja, and Dr. Becky Willits, but I'll kick off and Yeah, so in terms of the three positives, in Dudley, I think it's fair to give it just a little bit of background. We are a bit of an outlier in terms of our care homes. We've got around 1,800 just within the Dudley borough, and then another 500 registered with CCG practices outside the Dudley borough. So it's a significant workload with well over 100 care homes. So keeping on top of this does create challenges. So first and foremost, we really had a great push on getting advanced care plans and treatment escalation plans in place, and the practices stepped up to discuss this with their patients and residents. It did have some issues, particularly in terms of residents who already had an advanced care plan where their preferred place of care was the hospital. So there was a letter devised to support the practices and to the care home managers about these difficult conversations. The second thing is, which I think has already been reflected, we've been able to go forward on some initiatives very, very quickly, particularly in terms of having remote video consultations and the virtual ward rounds, and also through our clinical hub, we've established a 24/7 community end-of-life rapid response team. Dr. Doman, are you on the call and want to expand on that at all? Perhaps not. So moving on to point 3, we've established quite good data intelligence and surveillance of care homes, and now we're able to focus that on a daily basis. I'm sure, much like other areas, which helps prioritise those homes with outbreaks and anticipating clinical needs. So that data is produced primarily by the local authority and shared with the clinical hub. In terms of knotty problems, then I think the swabbing started on April the 9th, and that was far too late really for care homes. So that has created quite a lot of issues, particularly as we've got so many residents, and ultimately we're playing catch up, and especially now with the new guidance. One of the things though, while we've got good intelligence now, it did take a bit of time to sort of pull that together. And I think it's an example of where not having public health embedded in the NHS, but in the Dudley MBC has led to it being a little bit cumbersome at times. Right, is Dr. Duja there, or Dr. Doman, who wants to pick up on some of the other points that they've added onto this?
Yeah, Andrew, I'm here, Dr. Duja from Dudley Group of Hospital. Well, one main point which I want to highlight is point 5, that like Ian said at the start, we were not ready for this, and some of the things we may need to learn, that we lost the communication in some areas, and some of the patients who were non-COVID had the more effect because all our concentration and focus went on the COVID patient. So all the services were moved towards the COVID patient, while other frail patients were either not seen in the hospital or not given the appropriate treatment in other areas. So that was one of the naughty points I want to highlight. Back to Andrew.
Okay, so
and Andrew, sorry, it's Sally Roberts here.
Hi, Sally.
Hi. Shall I just in terms of Black Country West Birmingham, I suppose that the Dudley work is replicated across the system, isn't it? So we're working collectively.
Very much, yeah.
across Black Country West Birmingham system with the same response in terms of the proactive swabbing across all of our care homes now, as well as the outbreak swabbing. We've got 247 care homes that we've got proactive teams in now swabbing patients and referring staff, asymptomatic staff as well, through the drive-through arrangements that we've got. And then the response teams are working really well, I think, in terms of the managing to kind of manage kind of really, you know, situations and stand shoulder to shoulder with homes in times of real adversity. The other thing just to add is we're planning a community mortality review across our community services, and obviously with the predominance around care homes, the data that we've got in care homes, and that'll be a system review. We've just drafted some terms of reference around that to support, but I'd echo kind of all of Andrew's and Dr. Duja's comments as well in respect of the local situations, but we are very much taking a system approach to the work of care homes. Interested to know, in terms of the letter that we've had, national letter from Simon Stevens around the enhanced care home work being brought forward, and the implications of that, and what we need to see the detail around that for work that we want to be carrying out across Black Country. Thanks, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. If we could move on, please, because we've got a few others to get through, but that's great. And as to that last point, I think Bola will be commenting on that, the national picture later on in this session. Okay, Andrew, carry on.
Yeah, so I'm happy really to conclude there, knowing that you've got quite a lot to go through. But certainly, you know, there has been some liberation, if you like, in terms of being able to progress quite rapidly with some of the initiatives, and the focus on care homes now is obviously very welcome, and particularly in terms of discussing with the PCN clinical directors and the new guidance that's coming out that Sally's just mentioned will once again help to enhance the surveillance we do have in the care homes, and hopefully we're able to recognise the deteriorating patients more rapidly, but it's always been reflected not just on those that have got COVID. So thank you.
And thank you, Andrew. And I think your three bullet points on what you need help with are also pertinent. We don't need to go through those now because everybody can see them, but I think those are really powerful.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to beat signal. Yeah, I think yeah. Do you want Emis then?
I can get Emis then.
Yeah, I might have a.
Hi, everybody. If you could just put your microphones on mute if you are not a speaker, that would be really helpful. And Andrew, Sally, if you could look at the comment section, there's a message to you from Shirley Way. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Okay, I'm moving on to the next system. You can move the next slide. So, Rachel Marsh from Leicestershire. Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
Hi. Sorry, Rachel. Let me just interject there. Nassar Doman, I think. Oh no, your microphone's now turned off. Rachel, it may well be your microphone. If you turn it off and turn it on again, then it might be less interference.
I don't. It's a bit tricky. It's not behaving itself.
That's just rectified. So go for it.
Okay, I've no idea what I've done, but I'm glad it's worked. Okay, right. So there are other members from the team on. From our positives, and a lot of these are similar to what other people have said, that we've managed to work really well as a system. We've had quite a lot of work that had been ongoing prior to COVID, and the lack of barriers and the ability for people to move and clinically engage quickly has enabled things to move on quite in a timely manner. And I think, as others said, having really engaged clinical leadership and not too much bureaucracy, but enough management capacity to ensure that things are done well, has been a real benefit. We've also got a discharge hub up and running, which has worked well, and we've had good working across our social care partners. Not everything's gone perfect as you would expect, but generally this has been felt to be a very positive thing, and something that we would be keen to further develop and continue. We've also had quite a lot of work with our care homes, with group-wide meetings, and we've also had some pilot work with Simon Conroy and team, enabling us to have discussions before conveyance, where the ambulance crew are there at a care home as to whether it's appropriate for this patient to come to ED or not, or whether we can put timely and responsive services into the home to support them. And that's gone quite well. I think we've, from our knotty problems, it has been difficult with conflicting and changing guidance that has come partly from PHC and then also from various national bodies, and the best way of managing safe discharges into care homes. And I think one of my questions is for patients that can't isolate in a care home, is really a community ward an appropriate area to isolate? Because I know that Northamptonshire have done that, and we're debating at the moment in Leicestershire, or whether we're not really isolating there either. So the comments would be grateful. I think communicating such rapid changes all across the system in a timely manner has been difficult at times. There's been an awful lot of communications, and there's a degree of a lot of communication, and therefore there's a bit of overload, but it's getting the correct things through. And although our discharges from the acute sector have become a lot quicker, and certainly taking out the issues of finance in UHL and being able to do that in the community has certainly improved our discharge processes and a lot. We're not managing the 3-hour metric. I don't know if other areas are. I think going forward, it's about continuing a clear mandate, and again continuing to have funding decisions done in the community rather than in hospital, and also how we work with our ambulance partners to ensure that frail patients in the general stack are referred appropriately to PAC teams. Certainly our frailty at the front door has not worked as it normally would, partly because we've had to change our whole systems of clean and dirty pathways, and staff have been moved into different areas, and we need to look at how we reintroduce that as we come into recovery phase, and evaluation of how it's doing. I think, as other people said, how our outcomes are for patients, rehab, post, etc. All right. And that was all I wanted to say, unless anyone's got anything else.
Hi, Ian. There's one question from Rachel, and I think in the interest of perhaps time, Rachel, if you have a look at the comment section, there's a question there from Helen.
Okay, yeah, I think Rachel is going to forward it to her, the model. Okay, I'll put something in the comments box about the discharge hub.
Rachel, hi, it's Ian here. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm also seeing that one or two sisters who weren't able to put forward their presentations might want to say something at the end of the formal presentation, which is absolutely fine. Amit, that's a comment to you, if that's okay. So, Chris, if we can move on to Shropshire. Emma Pira.
It's not Emma, it's Claire Parker, Director of Partnerships, to talk about this. So,
Pleasure.
first challenge of the day. So I'm fairly new into the system. So this is week 6. So Claire Old is also on the call, so she'll help support some of my comments, I think. So the 3 positive learning points that we've had through this process, I think obviously, and for many of us, it's about breaking down those barriers and actually enabling that level of trust, working towards that common goal of can do, that has just really made things move forward really rapidly. It's been really, really heartening to see how patients have really been put at the heart of everything that we've been doing. And actually that kind of gold silver command process has been really helpful in working through some of the very pragmatic and difficult issues. And there was some work already going on prior to COVID happening around some of the discharge processes and things like advanced care planning and so on that have actually moved forward much more rapidly because of COVID. I suppose the issues that we're looking at, obviously Shropshire's a very rural county. There's a lot of physical isolation as well as social isolation. So I think it's about capturing some of that community offer and volunteer offer and how we potentially take that forward. And then also some of that digital that we've been using through this process, particularly through primary care, but also through community and voluntary sector as well. So enhancing that community offer and the volunteer offer going forward, I think will be a challenge, but I think something that we're happy to take on. I'll ask Claire if she knows a bit more. I don't know a lot about the bed tracking, apologies, but if anybody's got any queries about that, I'm sure if they stick a question in, I can find the resource for that. And I guess like others, the challenge around PPE, particularly for the care sector, has been a real challenge, just and again from a rural perspective, just trying to get the right equipment to the right people at the right time going forward. And then the things that we probably need help with, I think we've probably come late to the care home sector with some of the support that we've been offering them. I think things like testing have been mentioned and already picked up, but it's also about supporting some of our care home staff and thinking about how, as we go forward, we get the learning from the care home sector as we develop, as Sally talked about, that new enhanced health programme going forward. And then some of the modelling that we need to do, particularly as we look at our older carers, but also thinking about how we remodel reablement and rehab and recovery length and so on. So I'm just going to stop there and just ask Claire Old if there's anything that she wants to add.
Thanks, Claire. So the bed tracking is about the fact that we had our own bed tracker with our local care homes group, and it was working really well and people were putting information onto it. And then the advent of the other tracker meant that we couldn't, and we were linked in also with the CSU with that. So it was quite a regional thing that we were doing. Powys across the border obviously were linking into that as well. So it meant that we knew where our beds were in our whole area. The National Care Tracker's been almost like starting again and then starting again, learning how to use it. So it's taken us back quite a way from where we were, which has been a knotty problem for us. But we're getting there now. And the CQC writing to the care homes to say that they had to use the National Care Tracker was just the turning point where we felt we had to switch on the national one rather than using both. So that's really what that challenge was about there. I think that's about it, really, unless there are any other questions.
Excellent, Claire and Claire. Chris, are there any sort of burning questions? I'm conscious of time because we've got quite a lot together. It's such a rich content we've been hearing today.
Yeah, there are questions, not specifically to this presentation and stuff that we can be picking up in the Q&A.
Excellent. OK, thank you, Claire and Claire. If we can move on to the next system, please, Chris. Lincolnshire, Melissa. Hello,
Good morning,
Miss.
everybody. Can I just check if Kim's on the call as well, please? Kim Barr.
Yeah, I've come on the call, Melissa. Do you want me to start and you chip in? Is that all right? We were hoping that Alistair might be able to join us as well, but I think he's well. If he's still on, if he's on, then please chip in, Alistair. Lincolnshire, we're a sort of a couple of weeks behind everybody. So actually, Lincolnshire feels that we've just been planning, waiting for it to come, but actually it's helped us. The positives are that it's really helped us break down things and create alternative pathways across the systems and services, with building on some of the work that we've done. We found the integration can be done more rapidly. Definitely from a day-to-day perspective, I neighbourhood lead. I chair the Frailty group, but also neighbourhood lead for a patch. So we've created virtual MDTs at a local level. We've created, from a community perspective, we've created a palliative care daily call, so we can share share workloads and skill mixes with our local hospices. We've found it a real opportunity to really embed best practice tools using the Edmonton, the Spic for All and EPACs, and that's actually really helped with we've done some sort of bespoke virtual training using Project Echo with St Barnabas to deliver that to local groups and care homes and our specialist teams. So it's just sharing that workload. The three sort of knotty things was the top-down approach about sort of using Rockwood, because I'm sure many of you know we elected about 5 years ago to embed the Edmonton across the system. It was used from the acute side. It has been embedded in the acute side, but that did create a few issues to begin with. We're a bit worried about where all the frail patients have gone post-COVID, sort of tracking people, but we're hoping neighbourhood working will help us work with that, because we're working with the GPs in primary care, working through that shielded list. That's helped us, to find people that we didn't even know about. Another knotty issue is delirium in the community. We still don't really have a pathway in the community. It's something that was on our to-do list. We had the working groups pre-COVID, but we want to work on that now. It's a real priority for when this all settles down. Initially, we did have the COVID cells, did sort of put everybody back into siloed working, and Frailty didn't fit into a silo. It works across everybody's business, so that's something that's been a bit tricky for some of us. What we'd like more help with, linking it to general practice more. Care homes is a big issue for us in Lincolnshire. A lot of people like to retire, particularly on the East Coast, and a number of general practices we have in ratio to care homes, and then also we have recruitment tensions issues. So that's something we're just beginning to work with Melissa. In fact, we had a bit of a discussion about it yesterday, how we start looking at that. So I'm really pleased that's been put up the priority list. But it's that link with learning difficulties and mental health and homelessness. We've got a lot of vulnerable people that are very frail. So again, I think it's thinking of frailty across all age groups, not just over 65-year-olds. So a bit concise from us, but that that's just our feedback really. Lots of other work happening in the background. But Melissa, I don't know if I've missed anything there.
No, I think that's a good summary, Kim. I mean, obviously this crisis has been desperate, but I think there are some real silver linings and lessons learned, and some really good practice that I hope will carry on once we're out of all of this.
Hi, Lincolnshire team, it's Ian here. I mean, that was a fantastic summary, and I think a key point when you said about national implementation of Rockwood, as it were, when you had a local system with the Edmonton scale already working well. I think that's where we've got to have that flexibility regionally and nationally. So if you've got local system, that actually goes back to the previous speaker as well, where you've got a local system that works well being usurped and then disconnected by, or short-term disconnected by, a national imperative. We need to get better at making that work better for systems across the country. Excellent. Chris, who are we moving on to next? Were there any burning questions, Chris, for?
No questions for that presentation, just an ongoing conversation on the chat, which is excellent because there's lots of sharing going on.
Fantastic, and I'm not doing too well on the time, so I'll keep on trying to get this better. Martin, hi, good to see you.
Hi.
Well, hear from you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Our background is that we couldn't have timed the pandemic worse. We just changed our arrangements around our Frailty group. We had a horrible winter, and then the pandemic turned up. So we feel as though we've lost a little bit of time. But during this period, there's been quite a number of what I've described as challenges. They have been knotty problems, partly solved. The care home sector has been a big issue for us. I think we're a bit behind. We've got 3 acute providers, 4 different places, and quite a raft of care homes within the community, with all sorts of different setups amongst them. So the system is not particularly consistent, and that has caused some issues. We've got particular issues with care homes, not that we've not tried to engage, but we've got a significant degree of what I would describe as pandemic terror in the community. And in spite of PPE and support and education and primary care support, we've got care homes who will send their patients to an emergency department and refuse to have them back until a negative test has been achieved. So we're actually running into a lot of difficult scenarios and difficult relationship issues around that. Another difficult issue for us is the fact that we have 3 acute providers, 4 different places, a couple of local authorities, and the different approaches of different providers has caused us some disharmony in terms of getting an organised response and some consistent degree of understanding across our STP. So, for example, our largest acute provider has been very focused on sorting out acute frailty at the front door, which is understandable, but it's been to the exclusion of local general practitioners, so the relationship there hasn't formed, and it's led to disengagement with the rest of Warwickshire, which is something we're starting to remedy, but it's early days yet. Across the board, we've struggled to get a meaningful relationship with our ambulance service. So there are pockets of good practice, for example, in South Warwickshire, where we're starting to have the community teams, the acute teams and ambulance service working together to avoid unnecessary conveyance, but that's not emulated in the other 2 parts of the trust. We've been slow with data, we've been inconsistent, we don't have a functioning dashboard across the STP yet. Again, that's in process, and is one of our challenges where we may require some help. I've mentioned the primary care integration, and I've talked about timing. System use of data I've also mentioned already. That because we've started using it more and started some aspects working better as a system, that's largely been based on starting to use data. For example, we've got evolving a care home dashboard, and we've got the rudiments of something more related to acute care, which I think will grow further. So we have seeds there. Certainly, integration with primary care in Warwickshire has proceeded apace, and that has been almost a direct consequence of the crisis. I'm sorry. I think for us, recognising the pivotal role of not only care homes but actually also now domiciliary care is a critical one for us. So do we need help? Well, maybe, but actually we've started making progress in a range of fronts. So maybe not just yet, because actually having help might actually disrupt some of those relationships. And I'd be reluctant to do that because that's been one of the great bonuses. That's all I've got to say just now. Happy to take questions.
Great, Martin, thank you. And I agree, I think if things are working well, having external interference as opposed to support is not what we want. I mean, it's just encouragement and support. This is what this session is all about. Chris, any burning questions from the message board?
No, just supportive ones to Martin, others people that are experiencing similar things, and Martin, I'm sure, can pick that up in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chris, so we got right, so really now it's an open forum, and we would want this to be done through the message board about people wanting to share. And I know there are one or two systems that haven't been able to get their slides in, and I'd go to Stafford first of all. Amit, just for, I mean, apologies if I'm constraining time, because we're in the last 27 minutes of the session. We've got Bola to talk as well. But Amit, if there are some key bullet points that you'd like to share from the Staffordshire system.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much, and morning everyone. So I think the key things from our system, the good things that we've seen, is the amazing response from the discharges, and they are meeting the discharge targets, and the discharges are pretty fast. So age-old problem has been resolved for now. Now the question is, how do we sustain that, and what are other systems doing in order to sustain that? The other good thing that is around the virtual clinics, and many of these have already been mentioned, so I'm not going to go into the details of what is good. The key thorny issues that we are facing at the moment is around the BME staff, but that's not so much related to this. But because we've got a lot of leaders here, I think I would like to put the question: are there any specific interventions in our trusts that we need to do to protect the BME staff as well as the BME patients? And then the other issue which has already been raised is around what are we doing to identify and treat the unknown unknowns, i.e. those who have not accessed our services because of the fear of COVID and are not coming to the hospitals. In terms of my questions, there are quite a few questions which have been mentioned on the chat. So, but any info or intelligence around likelihood of further waves will be good. It seems that there is some high-level community data set being produced. So, is some in terms of modeling? So, any early sight of that will be useful. And then I think there's a lot around what are various teams doing around community oxygen provision for patients who are being discharged. I guess it's a bit too early to assess and understand the extent of lung damage, but that will hopefully come in time. And then how do we deal with the mental health patients in the community who have largely got poor compliance with self-care sometimes and may be impacted quite negatively? I think those are the kind of key questions I had in mind that I needed some help with, really. So to make it short, that's what it is.
Much appreciated, Amit, for being short and concise. And I think that raises a number of questions. I'm responding to your comments about further waves. I think just briefly say here, my learning is basically based around the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, when there were at least 3, if not 4 waves over 18 months to 2 years. We will just have to watch what happens with Germany, Spain, Japan and the USA, but as well as locally. But that's going to be an interesting thing to be watching over the next 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months of the pandemic. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments about that, because I think this is going to be very important for people living with frailty, about how we get consistent, high quality outcomes for those patients. Because yes, it's great that we're getting really good early supported discharge and increasing capacity within our acute hospitals, but if that's at the expense of outcomes for people living with frailty, we're doing that population a potential disservice, and we've got to get really smart at this. I will now get off my pulpit on that one. Chris, are there any other particular burning questions that people want to raise just through this next 10-15 minutes before Bola comes on?
Yeah, so there's around, I've counted around about 20 questions in total. And whilst we've got time, I'll just pose them to yourself and to Bola. I see that she's joined us, and we can see what your thoughts are. Bola, I know you responded in the chat in regards to the BME question. Did you want to respond verbally?
Hi, Chris. Hello, everybody. Great to be here. So, absolutely, just to say that the concern around BAME staff being disproportionately affected by COVID is top priority, and Simon Stevens is coordinating a work stream to really look into that. The Chief Medical Officer has also commissioned some research to look at what other explanations there may be. However, on a practical note, there was a letter that came out yesterday from Simon Stevens' office to the chief execs of all NHS providers, setting out the expectations in relation to BAME staff, particularly in terms of conducting risk assessments. And I will really commend that letter to colleagues who may not have seen it. Happy to circulate after this meeting. It gives a clear indication of how we may support people. So that's from a national perspective. In my own local organization, we've taken an approach now of canvassing the opinion of BAME staff over this last week. We've done daily conference calls with a view to generating an action plan that actually reflects the voices of people locally. And I think that's a really useful approach for others to consider.
Thanks, Bola, for clarifying. I've seen the letter. It doesn't really say exactly what trusts should do. And what we are looking for is some kind of a intervention that we may have to do. It does say about risk assessment, but it doesn't really detail what should be done about it. You know, for example, whether everybody should be given FFP3 and prioritized in terms of a full PPE, I mean, or yeah.
So I think that's why it's important to hear the voices of people in our own individual organizations, because one size won't fit all. I think what that letter tried to do was to set out expectations, if you like, rather than telling us how to do it in our own organizations, because of course there will be local variations in terms of how people wish to proceed. So I'm finding our staff briefings this week particularly useful because people are telling us how it feels from their point of view. And I think whatever answer we provide will therefore be more meaningful because it's been locally determined. That would be my observation.
Hi, Bola.
Thanks,
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, Chris, carry on. Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll try and get through as many questions as possible, and I know that Bola and Ian will be reading the chat, and whatever they can't answer, they'll certainly get a comment on. Next question is that there was a general kind of consensus of some comments around that the governance step back around funding had impacted on positive quick change, and so there's a question from Marsha asking, what are your thoughts about how likely this kind of approach is going to be sustained for post-COVID?
Shall I go first, Bola?
Sure.
I mean, I think a crucial thing is making sure that the patient and outcomes are at the centre. I think we've had a potentially slightly differential emphasis on creating capacity, and I put capacity in inverted commas there around ITU capacity and bed capacity. And I think what we've got to be very clear about is that we've learning for the way forward, we've got to make sure that we have a real clear focus on outcomes for people living with frailty. As you know, I'm very clear that I had a huge concern over the last 5-10 years around the extent of hospital-acquired functional decline for older people with frailty going into hospital. I hope and pray, but I would love to see the evidence for this by measuring outcomes, that actually having designed effective appropriate admission avoidance processes with appropriate interventions and appropriate early supported discharge with a focus on outcomes, that we may have reduced hospital-acquired functional decline. But without that focus on outcomes, we won't have that evidence, and then the finance beast will come back to the fore. So I think it's been very important that we've had clinical leadership setting up the new pathways, but we have got to provide the evidence for the outcomes that then allows the outcomes to control the agenda, not having finance tail wagging the dog, if you don't mind me using that analogy.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll build on that by saying we have had a burning platform. And this burning platform in terms of the pandemic has been a very powerful enabler in a sort of rather paradoxical way in releasing the funding in a way that we've never had before. But I will echo Ian's comments that the way we then sustain that is to continue to demonstrate value for money, and apologies to be putting it in that sort of really cold transactional terms. But this is the scenario and the environment in which we find ourselves. And when we talk about outcomes, I think it's important as local systems that we think about it under that quadruple aim. So demonstrating the patient outcomes, being clear what the patient's experience of this way of working is, the value for money element, and also the impact on staff and the staff experience. So I really find the Institute for Health Improvement's quadruple aim a very helpful framework in, demonstrating impact and the added value of whatever it is that we're doing. So yes, it was just to echo Ian's comments that we really do need to demonstrate outcomes across those 4 domains in order to hopefully sustain the level of funding that has come as a result of this crisis.
Thank you, Bola. Moving on then, it's less of a question but more of a statement which other people might share. It's from Shams Duja. Within his organisation, it looks like the urgent response to the first wave of COVID meant that he pretty much had lost all of his estate resource on Frailty. And so he's in a position now where he doesn't have a Frailty estate. So do you have any advice or support message for him or any others that are in that similar position right now?
Bola, can I go again first, and then obviously further comments from yourself, or is that all right with you?
Please do.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Frailty isn't about a place, it's about a process, it's about a mindset, it's about a focus on outcomes, and it's really about a focus on what matters to me and not just what's the matter with me. I've watched over the last 10 years multiple acute frailty units being set up, for instance, as I watched acute medical units being set up. If you don't have the right processes in place and the right mindsets and the right focus on what matters for people as opposed to what's just the matter with them, then actually you don't get the right outcomes. So it goes back to structure, process plus patterns equals outcomes. So going back to Don Badian's principles.
I think it's important for us to recognize that there is a bit of a yes and to perhaps not look at it from a binary point of view. Just speaking to Juju's comments there around the fact that if you had pre-existing estate, I can understand, the sense of loss that you may feel, but perhaps therein lies an opportunity to maybe think about embedding Frailty as an approach and a way of working, and as Ian was saying, as a mindset across the organization. Because what I've observed is that oftentimes when you have a dedicated site, the rest of the hospital establishment almost sees it as the business of those people over there. And therefore, you lose the opportunity of embedding that frailty sensitive approach across the organization. So it may be that, this loss of estate is actually a catalyst to begin the conversation with teams across the trust that actually frailty is everybody's business. And how are you tackling it in your individual specialties and percolate that way of thinking in that way.
Thank you, Bola.
And Bola, so much more diplomatically put. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ian, we've got 13 minutes left. There are more questions. However, in the interest of hearing about the future picture from Bola, could I make a suggestion that everybody on the call, if you look at the chat section, there are questions which I know Ian and Bola are going to look at after this is finished, but there are actually questions that are phrased to you. To the wider system, what your experience are, how are you managing things? So my ask would be that if you could look at those questions and use this as a portal to put down your thoughts and your knowledge and to share that, because there may well be something reciprocal that you can get from other people's answers. So the more we all answer, the better the experience for everybody. But Ian, over to you.
Chris, absolutely. I want to echo that. This was about connecting people. So please use this, not just the verbal responses, but also the conversation pieces to connect with each other and to share experiences, because this is what it's been all about. So thank you for everybody's contributions so far, and it's been a fantastic session. I just want now to hand over to Dr. Bola Owolabi to talk about coronavirus pandemic, a paradigm shift, as the final presentation, and I will do a closing session for the last couple of minutes. So Bola, over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks for the invitation. It really is great to have been able to listen to the last few presentations from Lincolnshire, Coventry and Warwickshire. I'm really sorry, I was in another call, so I missed the ones before that, but lots of rich learning there. So it is indeed a paradigm shift, and as we've just been talking about now, there's a whole sea change in our mindset and the way that we're all sort of viewing the world in a way that's very different, even 6 weeks ago now, and that's why I've started to think about this as a fundamental shift in our paradigm, i.e., our mindset, our approach, our view on the world, how we see one another. And I wanted to, rather than boring you with a whole list of guidance documents, which I'm sure you're all keeping track of, I just wanted to elevate above that a little bit and have a conversation about how do we begin to harness all of the innovation, the creativity, the advances that we've made in unbelievable time as a result of this pandemic. Is there a way that we can start to harness all of that learning in a structured way? And that's why I brought in the issue of appreciative inquiry as a quality improvement methodology. And I think it's important because it being a QI methodology gives it validity, from an intellectual point of view in having a conversation. But I also like this methodology because of its human element. And whilst I completely agree with the need for us to be rigorous and forensic in terms of our quantitative assessments and evaluation of what works, I think appreciative inquiry, because it uses stories, is a very powerful tool, because it brings in the voices of people. And I think people's voices are really important, because when we hear our own voice in what is happening, there is also a buy-in that comes, which you might not get if it's just a set of data and tables. And I'm not in any way trying to diminish the importance of, qualitative measurements, but I'm just conscious that in human systems, stories are very powerful because we remember them. We can see ourselves in them, and appreciative inquiry offers, a facilitated way of people being able to tell their stories, but not just as an end in itself. It also presents the opportunity for us to be able to design a new normal using some of those stories, because the gems oftentimes come from just giving people the space and the opportunity, to share what life has looked like during a situation like this. And that's why I wanted to just put this on the table for people to consider. So organizations are now getting into the recovery planning phase. So I've just come off the recovery planning meeting of my own organization, and I would like to encourage colleagues on this call, perhaps to start to make the case as you participate in those planning sessions, for the use of a quality improvement approach to actually capture, the changes in the ways of working, the integrated person-centered way that we're all working now, the digital approach, remote consultations. I'm a GP, and it's been amazing to be able to use video consultations on top of my existing telephone consultations. And I'm sure colleagues will have stories like that, you know, breaking down organizational boundaries, overcoming governance challenges, overcoming legal issues, finance, as we've been talking about. And I think it will be a great shame for us to miss the nuggets in the midst of all of this by not creating those spaces and those opportunities for people to actually tell their stories in the way that we've done on this forum already today. And what that then does is it takes us into the design phase of appreciative inquiry, where we use the learning and the creativity and the innovation and all of the things that have gone well as a result of our response to this pandemic. We use all that rich learning to design a new normal. I get very anxious when people start talking about returning to business as usual. I think that's the last thing we all want, is to return to business as usual, because business as usual had its difficulties and issues, which I don't think any of us wants to go back to. I think it's important to talk about a new normal that is asset-based, that is based upon what we've got, what we've learned, what we've developed, the challenges we've overcome, as opposed to being stuck on the things that we're missing. That's not to say that we shouldn't look at the things that are difficult and challenging. I think what I'm saying is, when we focus on the things that we have been able to achieve, it gives us the energy, the impetus, and the ideas for overcoming the areas that that may well be difficult. Next slide, please. And the reason why I'm advocating this approach is because even in situations of crisis and pandemic, as we find ourselves, something works. And I think a lot of the stories that we've heard today shows that a lot of things have worked. And so it's about finding out what those things are and creating the conditions and the environment for them to flourish, whether that is about people feeling enabled and empowered to work more collaboratively across organizational boundaries, whether that's us being more brave about and not letting governance get in the way of doing the right thing for our patients. Because, you know, the number of things you get into a room as a clinician and with others, and you're clear about what we need to do to support patients, and suddenly somebody flags the governance card. I'm not saying governance isn't important. It's important because it keeps us safe, but sometimes it can become a barrier. And I think a lot of things that we've learned throughout this process, we need to create the conditions for them to flourish. And I think there's something about focus. There is a natural tendency in all of us to focus on the areas that are difficult. The problem with that is that we may sleepwalk into a problem mindset, unintentionally, where we focus so much on the problems that becomes our reality, because it becomes the way that we see. So I think my plea is about just recognizing that we have had difficulty. We are in the middle of an adversity, but by the same token, we have been able to summon our collective courage and creativity and have done some stunning work, for which I thank everyone on the call. And finally, to say that, you know, when we move forward, it's best to take with us the best of our old ways. And that's what I mean when I talk about the new normal. Whatever new normal we create beyond this point, let's take with us the best of what is coming out from what is otherwise a truly dreadful situation. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to conclude on this slide, which is the fact that everything that is happening has actually served to now accelerate the Aging Well program. You know, we were all going to do this in any case, in terms of the urgent community response, the care homes work, and anticipatory care. And rather than trying to create new priorities, what I've been encouraging people around the country is, you've already got the priority as set out within the NHS long-term plan in relation to how we're going to support older people living with frailty, multimorbidity, and complex needs. And it's about using the energy that this whole situation has created to accelerate everything we were going to do in any case. And just to really spend some time on care homes here, going back to that letter from Simon Stevens, you will see that we're now bringing forward, the deployment of the enhanced health in care homes approach, not just from a service point of view, but as an approach from October back now to May, because of the absolute imperative for us to collaborate to really support our colleagues within that sector. The Department of Health and Social Care are taking the lead on this, ably supported by NHS England and Improvement. And I just really wanted to focus our attention on the fact that this is really the top priority now from a national perspective. And I think if we can have some focus on that in our local systems, it would be incredibly helpful. And just finally, just to flag to your attention some publications in the coming week or so that will help us as we begin to plan the next phase of our response. We've developed a COVID-19 discharge guidance that really sets out in great detail what somebody who has been in hospital with COVID-19 looks like, what their needs may be, in the broadest terms, not just physically. We've looked at the psychological needs, we've looked at the potential for post-traumatic disorder in the person themselves and the people around them. It's a very comprehensive guidance, and it's now going through its publication processes, so I really want to commend it to you. There's also a community services prioritization document, which colleagues will have seen. That's been very rapidly revamped, reviewed, updated, and should again be published, hopefully in the next week or so. And I've already mentioned about the letter from Simon Stevens yesterday, which I will circulate after this event. So thank you so much, everyone, for all the incredible Herculean effort that has gone into making sure that, we have kept people safe, we have supported one another, and it's about how we now harness all of that to create a new reality outside of this crisis when that time comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bola. Chris, any quick burning questions for Bola? I know we're just coming up to 12:59, so 1 minute left of the session.
So we are at time, Ian, and I know that people probably have got 1 o'clock meetings. There is a few comments around Bola's presentation, and I'm sure that Bola will read through those once this is finished and respond on the chat.
Hi, so if I just sum up in the last 30 seconds, I just want to say thank you for everybody for their contribution for this session. It's been really heartwarming to hear people's local efforts, the collaboration and integration across systems, and the sharing that's gone on today. We may want to put on further events like this. We'll be guided by systems to see if that would be helpful or useful over the next 3, 4, 6 months or whatever. But my final comment would be to say outcomes, outcomes, and outcomes, I think is it will be absolutely drive the way forward for the new normal after, well, during the recovery phase, however long this pandemic is going to go on for. So once again, thank you everybody for your contributions. It's been a fantastic session.
Thank you, Ian, for chairing as well. And on behalf of the Midlands Improvement Team, you can see a message there. If you require anything, whether it's advice, support, information, or you need messages to get through to Ian, Bola, or any of the other presenters, then there's my email address there. It's a pleasure to join the region, and I hope that we in the Improvement Team can be useful to you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.